This meeting is being recorded. Okay, will be recorded. It's a packed parsha. It's a lot of questions come out of this Torah portion. We'll try to get to some of the good stuff. Again, I'm not a constant joiner on my father's classes. I don't know what has been said, what has not been said. So if this is something that is, or something that you felt a little repetitive, please forgive me. Okay, let's see. Parshas Chukas, 7:35. So Parshas Chukas. And in regards to questions, feel free to ask questions at any time. I don't know how my father does it, but just uncover your audio, or maybe wait till maybe I've finished my sentence, and then ask your question, and then we'll be good to go. All right, so Parshas Chukas. Parshas Chukas is an interesting parsha, has a lot of different angles to it, a lot of different, it's not just one, specific story. It starts about talking about the laws of the red heifer, which is the ashes of the red heifer is able to be able to purify someone that came into contact with the dead person. And then they kind of get to the end of their journey throughout the desert. Miriam passes away, and along with her, the well of Miriam, which has kept the people sustained with water, which is vital to survival throughout all the traveling in the desert. And there's this whole not uprising, but there's this the people are upset, they're thirsty, and Moshe reaches out to Hashem, and Hashem tells Moshe to get water from the rock, and we'll go into that story a little bit separately. Bottom line is that Moshe hits the rock and makes the water come out, and because of hitting the rock, him and Aaron are both not allowed to enter the promised land, and we'll get to that, and we'll try to maybe uncover possible solutions and reasonings and logical reasonings as to why, after all Moshe has done for the Jewish people, why hitting the rock, which seemingly seemed to be an idea that he had done in previous instances, why was that the blow that caused him not to enter the land. Aaron passes away, the high priest, Moses' brother, passes away at Mount Hahar. It's called Har Hahar, and Mount Hor, and is succeeded by his son Elazar. Then there's the story of the snake that attacks the camp and gets people very, very nervous, and Moshe makes a brass snake, I guess, on a high pole, and anyone who gazes at the snake, which is the angle of the snake is towards heaven, will be healed. The people sing a song about the water that they were provided with in the desert, and then Moses, the final conclusion of this week's Torah Parsha, Moses leads the people in a battle against the kings Sichon and Og, who doesn't want the people of Israel to pass through the territory and conquer their lands as they approach the Jordan River. So that's just a general outline. We have the red heifer, which I just want to briefly touch upon, which is something I'm sure many of you have heard, but we know that the commandments are separated into three categories. There's the categories where are completely logical and rational, and we understand why we're doing them. There's the laws that are that we don't understand, that we could come to an understanding after being taught in contemplation why we're doing those commandments and why those commandments specifically attach ourselves to God. And then there are commandments that, for example, the poster child for this set of commandments, which is called chukim, which are laws that we don't understand. You could learn from today till tomorrow and try to find a reasoning of why we were given the mitzvah through this certain manner, kosher or something, the red heifer or something, but you will never come to any sort of logical understanding as to why is this mitzvah being given to us. And which is always important to remember when we come across these mitzvahs, especially the way that it's brought out in this week's Torah portion. It says, this is the chuk of the Torah, this is one of the amazing laws that you'll never understand, the laws of the red heifer. Why does a red heifer Why is that is what chosen to purify someone who came into contact with the death? It's something you could maybe try to understand, but you can never get to something that is 100% logical. And what's important to remember is that when it comes to commandments and it comes to trying to keep and trying to do and perform as many commandments as possible, it's these commandments, the commandments that we don't understand, the commandments that we, even though maybe seem illogical for us, even human beings by nature are people of logic, these are the commandments that we commit ourselves to. And this sort of self-nullification that a person tells themselves that even though I don't understand and I want to understand and I base my life on understanding, I understand God, I understand connecting to God, I understand mitzvahs, but sometimes you hit a blockade where you're like, okay, this is too much. I'm not understanding why this is a mitzvah. It's specifically those commandments that bring out the self-nullification of the human being and the way that we nullify ourselves to God that really not just carry us forward in our connection to God, that's for sure, but it shows for our children and our children's children, the future generation, the generation that gets brought up looking at the different commandments and are getting taught from a young age about what Torah is. It's seeing the self-nullification, the ability that a person has to just, we do them because God commanded, that is what continues Jewish continuity. It's that what answers a lot of the different inner struggles that a lot of the youth have. A lot of the youth have a lot of questions. I mean, I know everyone has questions, but in general, it's known that the youth, and I deal with youth, so I can tell you firsthand, there's deep questions, and not even in a lack of understanding about God altogether. But a lot of times you find that people that saw that their friends and family around them commit themselves to mitzvahs that are beyond logic, it was specifically that brought out a certain aspect of the neshama, a certain aspect of the soul that said, you know what, there must be, if a person still feels connected and a desire to perform the mitzvahs, even though they have a lack of understanding and a lack of logic, and they continue day after day, year after year, and they not only do they keep the mitzvah, they teach those mitzvot to other people. That is what sparks a certain wonder, a certain acceptance to the concept of performing mitzvahs and connecting to God. So that's just a side subject. Let's talk a little bit about this, what I wanted to get into. And I'm going to read it verse by verse. I don't have a chumash in front of me, but I could find it online. Yes. We're going to talk about the story of the well of Miriam. We're going to talk about which that story led to Moses and Aaron not being led into the land of Israel. We're going to get into it. We're going to really get down to the details and opinions and try to really figure out and understand what's going on over here. And I think you'll come away from the class maybe enlightened, maybe understand the story a little bit more, maybe inspired. We're going to find out. We're going to find out. We're going to find out together. So we're going to start with, I'm going to read inside Parsha Chukat, chapter 20, verse 1. I don't know if anyone has a chumash in front of them, but I'll give it a minute for everyone to, if whoever wants to follow along. I'm just going to read it in English. I'm going to go through the story of Miriam's passing, and we'll go kind of through the story where Moses hits the rock. So verse 1. The entire congregation of the children of Israel arrived at the desert of Zin in the first month, and the people settled in Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. The congregation had no water, so they assembled against Moses and Aaron. They start coming up, there's a little collusion going on. They're trying to think, what's going on over here. The people quarreled with Moses and they said, if only we had died with the death of our brothers before the Lord, right? They start getting very aggressive with Moses. Why have you brought the congregation of the Lord to this desert so that we and our livestock should die there, right? You brought us all this way here. You promised that you're going to sustain us. And Miriam passes, the water passes, and now you're no longer to sustain ourselves and our animals. We would have been better of Egypt. And they actually say, why have you taken us out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is not a place of seeds or fig trees, grapevines, or pomegranate trees, and there is no water to drink. So Moses and Aaron moved away from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they fell on their faces. Then the glory of the Lord appeared before them. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, verse 8, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and speak to the rock in their presence, so that it will give forth its water. You shall bring forth water for them from the rock, and give the congregation and their livestock to drink. So what does Moses do? He takes the staff from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock and said to them, now listen. And Moses tells them, now listen, you rebels, can we draw water for you from this rock? Moses raised his hand and struck the rock with his staff 2 times. And then an abundance of water gushed forth, and the congregation and their livestock drank. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, saying, since you did not have faith in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly to the land which I have given them. These are the waters of dispute, the Mei Meriva, as they're called, when the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was sanctified through them. So wild story, a wild story. And what I want to get into 2 things, but we're to start off with the idea that Moshe, the whole story of Moses hitting the rock and the repercussions that followed. So the question that obviously jumps out to everybody is, and I touched on it at the beginning of the class, is that Moses dedicated himself and gave himself over to God and the Jewish people to lead them out of the land of Egypt. And it wasn't just, they led them out of Egypt and 7 days later they went into Israel and he dropped them off and said, God, it's your problem now. No, he worked with them. He toiled with them. They had to go through what ended up being what was supposed to be a short journey, ended up being a 40-year journey. And there was many from the previous portions. We all know there was many ups and downs, and he had to deal with different characters and personalities and different obstacles throughout the whole way. And finally, he makes this one, which, if you remember this, what we learned in previous Torah portions, you might think it's not even a mistake, and we'll get to that in a second. But he makes, let's say, seemingly this one mistake, and that's it. God says, I've been telling you all about the land of milk and honey. I've been telling you about this final destination that you are going to bring the Jewish people out of Egypt for, and boom, you hit the rock, you're not going in. You and Aaron are not going in. I mean, it seems a little harsh. Not seems a little harsh, it seems very harsh, and it's something that is very hard to understand. Well, so there's not any one specific go-to answer that most of the commentators kind of agree upon. So we're going to go through a little bit of some of the answers given, but before we do that, let's kind of get to another question: is how Moses was a guy that didn't make too many mistakes. If we heard the verse, I just read the verse, God tells him, take the staff and speak to the rock. And this is a guy that paid attention and did whatever God told him. Why is Moses, what was Moses thinking when making this mistake of hitting the rock? Let's take it back a notch. Forget about the punishment that he was given. We'll get to that in a second, but to Moses not to listen to a direct command from God, it's a little strange as well. So let's get into that for a second. So if you remember, there was 2 times previously in the Torah where Moshe is confronted with the lack of water for the people, and he's commanded to bring them water through hitting. Both times are through hitting the water. The first time is right after the Exodus. The Jews arrive in a place called Mara, which means bitter, and the waters of Mara were very bitter. And Moses turns to God and said, they can't drink this water. The people are thirsty. The animals are thirsty. What do I do? And God told him to take a branch and to hit the water. And the water turned sweet and the people were able to drink. Anyone remember that? It happened. Story number 2, a little bit later on, in a place called Rephidim, where again, the Jewish people are thirsty. They don't have water. They're, on the edge. They're getting antsy. They're getting angry. And Moses turns to God, and God says, that you see this rock, you should hit the rock, and out would come water. And it was actually that rock that became the rock that traveled with him throughout the entire journey in the desert in the merit of Miriam. It was that rock in the story of Rephidim. But again, we see that God tells Moses to hit the rock and water will come out. So that even strengthens, so that answers maybe one question, but again strengthens the second question. On one hand, maybe we could say that Moses, even though God told him to speak to the rock, he remembers these instances, throughout his 40 years of leadership, where God has told him already 2 times to take a physical piece of wood, whether it was the branch or whether it was the rock, and to hit the water would become good for them. So I guess you could put the question to bed as how could Moses make the mistake, is because Moses thought that he was doing what he had done already 2 times. So we got that question out of the way. And now, again, we get to this question, and it maybe even makes the question stronger. Why is God punishing Moses so strongly for not listening to him in this scenario to specifically speak to the rock? So again, there is no one go-to answer. I'm going to share with you about 3 or 4 answers that I found interesting. There's maybe 20, 30, 40 answers out there, maybe probably even more. I read probably about 12. I'm going to share with you 3 or 4 that I found that were interesting, and you can take it how you want it. So the first, let's just there's the simple answer. We're not going to count that, but we're going to get it out of the way. The simple answer is God said, speak, you hit, you didn't listen. God, maybe the punishment wasn't warranted, but we understand that God punished for not listening, especially someone held to the standards that Moses was held to. So this punishment was that you don't get to come to the land. Fine, simple answer. But let's get a little bit more creative. Let's see what the sages say, the commentaries say, that could get maybe a little bit more creative in the answers. So we saw the verse where Moses he's kind of yelling at the assembly of people and says, "Rebels, can we draw water from this rock?" Implying that it's possible for him to draw water. And God didn't like that Moses implanted within the Jewish people the idea that, it's that he didn't strictly say that God has to provide us a way of getting out of this scenario, that he gave into the doubt that it's possible for a man of flesh and blood to draw water. He shouldn't even addressed it at all. He should have simply said, we're relying on a miracle from God to draw the water. The fact that he gave some sort of credit to the notion that they might be thinking that a person could draw water from the rock already after 40 years in the desert got very upset. It was a lack in judgment. He shouldn't have said it. For though people that maybe were a little bit of questioning the whole, questioning God, questioning Moses as a leader, it may be fed in a little bit. That's the Ramban's answer. And so there was something, giving a little food to the doubters at a time when they're about to enter the land of Israel, God didn't like. Another answer given by the Rambam is, we see the way that Moses addresses the Jewish people. He screams at them and he calls them rebels, is that he was angry. He was angry. He lost it. And Moses, even though he was dealt with many, many, many difficult things, you rarely see, or maybe you don't even see at all, the fact that Moses gets angry and yells at the entire assembly of the Jewish people. And God said, you made it this far, and you were tried and tested, and you passed every test, more or less, and you lost it. And you can't, a leader, especially a leader like Moses' capabilities, can't show the ability to get angry at the rest of the Jewish people. So perhaps the fact that he got angry, God said, you know what, this is enough for you not to enter the land. And then those are 2, interesting answers. You could say the reason why God got more angry was for either because, he gave notion to the fact that a human being could take out water from the rock, or number 2, that he was angry at them. But what I really thought was interesting was this third answer I'm going to share with you. Something I've never heard before. I've never learned before. I learned it now for the first time. These next 2 answers, actually, I've never heard before, and they were both different types of answers that I found very interesting. So the first one is from Rabbi Rosen. It's called the Rogachover. I'm sure you've heard of the Rogachover, one of the most famous. He actually lived in this past century. One of the most famous rabbis of this modern era. Brilliant scholar. And he says a very interesting concept. He says that the water of the well of Miriam was not just used to sustain the people with water and nourishment, but it was also used as a mikvah, ritual bathhouse. We know that women, after their cycle, before that they could be intimate with their husbands, they go to a mikvah called Taras HaMishpacha, family purity laws of Nida. And the Jews are in the desert and they're traveling, and this rock, this well of Miriam, this was used as the mikvah for the women to immerse themselves in. So now, what did Moses do wrong? This is why God was upset at him. We know that the mikvah, the water, and the whole idea of purification has to be made out of items that don't contaminate, that don't contract impurification. So, for example, wood is a material or an item that is able to contract impurity. A piece of wood could become impure. However, rock is not allowed to become impure. And not allowed to. It doesn't become impure when it becomes in contact with someone that is impure. It's forever pure. And a mikvah is created out of rock for that very reason, so that the water should never become impure. Now, when it comes to filling up a mikvah, right? When it comes to filling up a mikvah and directing water into the pool that a person dips, that a woman dips in, you could only use pipes, wells, channels that are only made out of rock to guide the water into the mikvah. Moses, or maybe it's not from the source, but basically the last pipe, the last channel that the water passes through before entering the mikvah has to be made out of rock. So now Moses, what happened here was that he heard that Hashem had told him, take your staff. Now we know the Medrash explains that Moses had a staff made out of stone, whereas Aaron had a staff made out of wood. And being that he had used wood in the previous instances, the previous stories that I just shared a couple minutes ago, he thought that he had to use wood. So he took Aaron's staff to hit the rock. And because he used the staff made out of wood, the Rogachover explains, he now has made the water in the rock come in contact with something directly that was impure, thus completely making the mikvah invalid. And Rogachover says that actually it took them a while, many months, for them to get to fresh water again, for the women that became impure during that time to be able to go to the mikvah, and caused many strenuous times in relationships between the husbands and wives of those times that they weren't able to be physically intimate. Had he listened to God to take his own staff, remember, the previous stories, God directs him what exactly to take. Here, God too directs him exactly what to take. God says, take your staff, take the staff. And because Moses had the mistake of not paying directly attention to God's precise commandments, he made a little bit error, and he made the mikvah that was used for that time period invalid. And for that alone, and not listening to that specific detail, which had real repercussions for the Jewish people at the time, God said, I cannot let you in. And that's something I never heard before. And that's actually, I find that to be, I like that answer. I don't know about anyone else, but I like that answer. I'm going to share one more answer, and then we're going to go on to the next subject. So the last answer that I learned was, and this is an answer from the Zohar, a little bit more of a mystical, spiritual answer. And the answer that's given there is that the rock, that specific rock that gives forth water, which water is a primary source of sustenance and life for the human being is correlated to Torah. For a Jewish person, Torah is the life source that keeps us going, that keeps us connected to God. And the Zohar states that as the Jewish people are about to enter the land of Israel, Hashem wanted Moses specifically to speak to the rock, and the rock to react and answer Moses' call and come and not be forced that the water should come forth from the rock. Rather, ask and the rock will give, not hitting the rock, symbolizing that when it comes to the study of Torah, a Jewish person, doesn't have to work for it. There shouldn't be this concept of toiling in Torah, difficulties in understanding, difficulties in practicality of Torah, right? We know that Torah is not always the easiest. There's many, many levels of depth and dimensions when it comes to Torah. And God wanted that when it came to the Jewish people to enter the land of Israel, that Torah should not be something that comes by them in a difficult manner. It should come smooth, flow freely, providing us the vital spiritual sustenance that we need. But Moses knew, and this is him not listening to God. And we've seen before Moses takes a stance in leadership by the breaking of the tablets, where God wanted to destroy the Jewish people, and Moses pleads on their behalf and kind of convinces God. So same too here. Moses knew that in order for the people to really appreciate and experience connection, you got to work for it. You got to work for it. You can't just be given to it and expect a real, genuine connection. If a person works for something, it becomes much more appreciated, it becomes much more internalized. And Moses wanted that the Jewish people should, when it comes to Torah, vital spiritual nourishment, that they should work, that they should toil in Torah, learn it again and again in order to understand it. We should ask questions, and everything that the beauty of Torah brings us, and that will bring us a sense of strengthening and desire for our connection. Because what did he know? He knew that the people of that generation, they really looked to Moses and Aaron as the source of their connection to God. They looked at them and they saw, wow, these are two incredible holy people. And you know what? If they're connected to God and we see these miracles, then we're going to connect to God. There wasn't necessarily so much, I'm not going to use the word effort because there was effort, but there was, they didn't work at it as much as they could have. And Moses knew that they're about to enter the land of Israel, the land that sustains us and carries us, our home, where the base of Mikdash is going to be, where Mashiach is going to take us to. And he knew that in order for the Jewish people to survive and really build on their connection to God, that they have to understand that they have to work in understanding and knowing Torah. And even though he knew that by directly not listening to God and hitting the rock and forcing the water to come out, he knew that God wasn't going to let him and Aaron to go into the land, and he was okay with it. At the end of the day, he was okay with it because he wanted the Jewish people to go into the land of Israel and not look at, Moses and Aaron as this, as the connection between them and God, and, have that experience in that manner and have Torah flow freely. He knew that in order to sustain the Jewish people throughout all the generations, they're going to need to work for it. They're going to need to work for it. They're going to have to come into the land of Israel. There's going to be no official, there's no going to be no Moses, which is the greatest leader of all time there to connect them to God. There were leaders, don't get me wrong, but people awakened a little bit more. They worked a little bit more. Torah came to them to be a little harder. And that's why Moses hit the rock. And I thought that answer was also fascinating. So to summarize, if you're this week, you're going through the Torah portion, and you come up with come up to the story of Moses hitting the rock, you now have a little bit more background, maybe a little bit more answers to this whole phenomenon of simply hitting the rock and Moses getting punished and not being able to enter the land. Before we go to getting into our next, which touches on the same subject, does anyone have any questions? Okay, no questions. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or bad thing, but whatever, it is what it is. All right. So continuing continuing in this story of the well of Miriam and Aaron and Moses and passing. So we know that when Miriam passed away, as we just read, the well of water stopped. Similarly, when Aaron passes away, the clouds that carried the Jewish people throughout the desert, and we'll get into a little bit more about the clouds in a minute, but the Ananei Kavod, clouds of glory that carried the Jewish people, that went along with the Jewish people throughout their journey in the desert, which was in the merit of Aaron, that they stopped. Now, when you go and you read the Torah, you find that the well comes back. We know that Moses hits the rock, and however it came back, we just got into it for a half hour. But bottom line is the well comes back, which it's known that the well came back in Moses' merit. But we don't see anywhere specifically about how or when the clouds of glory came back. Did they come back? Did they not come back? We also don't see that the people are up in arms about it. When it came to the water and the well of Miriam, the people were up in arms. They needed their sustenance. They needed to survive. They right away start, forcing the issue. But we don't really see anywhere in regards to the clouds of glory that, the people make any sort of scene. And we don't really know fully what happens. The Torah doesn't really show us and tell us exactly what happens in regards to the clouds of glory. So we're going to get into that a little bit. It's a good question. It's a good question. Deserves to be asked. Sometimes it may be overlooked when you're reading it because the Torah doesn't touch on it, but it's a good question. What happened to the clouds of glory? And with that comes to, we also could better understand, not that we could keep talking about him, but we could understand leadership of Moses. So we have two questions, essentially. Question number one is that, do the clouds come back? Is there any recording of the clouds coming back? And question number two is, if they did come back, did the people have to get up in arms about it in order for them to come back? Why weren't the people, if they came back without the people getting upset, why weren't the people upset? And we'll get into that. So at first glance, there's a possible answer. Answer number one is that the clouds didn't need to go back. The clouds, they left and they didn't need to come back. And the reason for that being is because when Aaron passes away, it was already at a point where the Jewish people were camping very close to civilization. And we know that the clouds, when we talk about the clouds in the previous Torah portions, they served four purposes, right? One purpose, that it shielded them for the severe heat of the desert. Number two, we know that it cleansed their clothing. Number three, we know that the clouds gave them direction, right? Direction, exactly how to navigate the journey on the desert. And we know that it also got rid of all the obstacles on the journey that were in their way: snakes, scorpions, cactus, whatever it is that's in the desert that makes it uncomfortable to travel. The clouds kind of smoothed everything away. So, being now that they're encamped around civilization by Mount Dahar, you could say that they didn't need to know the way because there was, some sort of road or direction of where to go. They didn't need clothing because they always could go into town and get clothing from the civilization that were there. They didn't need directions. They didn't need to be worried about the heat because they could have, the way that the people lived in the desert over there, I guess they used civilization. They had tents, they had whatever it was that blocked them from the heat, umbrellas, I don't even know. And being that, again, it was a place of civilization, so they didn't have any obstacles on the road. The roads were cleared or paved or whatever you call it. But basically, it was a place where people lived. So the fact that other people in the world managed to live there, so the Jewish people didn't need the clouds to make life easier for them. So that's a possible explanation, and a couple of the commentaries like to share and give their reasoning. But right away, if you look into, further on in the Torah, we know that explanation cannot be a good explanation for various reasons. One, we know that even though the Jewish people were very close to entering the land when Aaron passed away. Nevertheless, in part of making the journey longer than it had to be, which was the 40 years, they actually went backwards 7 steps from where Aaron was buried. So they had to continue traveling, and they had to continue traveling in the wilderness. They went back 7 steps. So if they went back 7 steps, that must mean that they still needed the clouds to guide them and give them all the proper necessities that came with it. We also know that when Aaron passed away, the Canaanite king said, now is the most opportune time to attack. The clouds of glory are not with the Jewish people anymore. Now is the time to attack. And at the end of the day, he does attack. And at the end of the day, the clouds, who were there for safety, helped defeat the Canaanite king. So we know again, maybe it's not quoted directly in the Torah that the clouds were there, but we could deduce that the clouds were present. That the clouds were present. We know that the clouds told them when to start, when to stop, where to go. And again, we just mentioned that they traveled 7 steps backwards, and then they had to travel forwards in order to get to the land of Israel. And the only way that they were traveling was through the clouds. Torah doesn't mention any other way of travel. So we know that the cloud. Oh, one more thing, that in next week's Torah portion, in Parshas Balak, that the clouds were used to identify sinners. That the people would be surrounded by the clouds, and the sun would shine, and the cloud would peel back and allow the sun to shine on whoever sinned. So again, that actually does mention that the clouds were there. So again, we see that the clouds were directly involved still. So we go back to the question. The question is, why or how or when does the Torah mention this concept of the clouds coming back? When did they come back? Was there a reason that they came back? And why did the people not? We know why did the people not go up in arms about the cloud and the protection that the cloud provided? So, in order to get to the final answer, one thing that this is again, it's all about the fine print. Torah, time and time again, shows us that you cannot forgive any letter, any this, any that. And it's again, the Torah again shows us again in this scenario. In this scenario, if you read the actual texts, there are times where Torah and Rashi, the commentator on the Torah, uses the words clouds in general, and also uses the words anane hakavod, clouds of glory. So if you start going through and you start reading about all the different times, and Rashi, we know that these are not specific. Rashi didn't just, the Torah wasn't out of breath 1 second and just used the short version, the clouds, but other times used the clouds of glory. No, the Torah was specific. So what we could deduce and what we could come to the conclusion that there was 2 types of clouds. There was the cloud that provided the essential 4 levels of protection that provided the Jewish people, protected them from the heat, the clothing, the way, and from harm. And what's the 4th? Directions. There was 1 set of clouds, and there was also clouds that were called anane hakavod, that glorified, that showed that that just were simply there to glorify the Jewish people. You looked at those clouds and you saw that this is God's people, the glorified nation of the Jewish people, and those clouds were in the merit of Aaron. So now when Aaron passes away and the Torah doesn't mention anything about the return of the clouds of glory, we know that the clouds are there. The basic clouds, I'm not going to call them basic because they were miraculous clouds, but we're going to call them regular clouds. So the regular clouds were there. We know that because we see that the Jewish people still need the clouds. And the only way that they were able to survive, and the Torah doesn't say any other possible way that they were able to survive. So we know that they were because of the clouds. But yet we perhaps say that the clouds of glory didn't come back. They left and they didn't come back. The well of Miriam came back, but the clouds of glory didn't come back. Now, if we say that the clouds of glory didn't come back, and that the clouds of glory is what left when Aaron passed away, it answers 2 questions. Question number 1, it answers why the people didn't complain. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to kvetch the fact that the clouds of glory weren't hanging out on top of us, showing us how much, showing really the other nations of the world how amazing and exalted the Jewish people were. When it comes to water, come on, we know how it is. If there's no chant on Shabbos, we start kvetching. If there's no food, we start kvetching. If we don't have water, we start kvetching. So the water left, the Jewish people started kvetching. The other clouds that were not there in the merit of Aaron, the regular clouds, they stayed. So the people didn't kvetch. That's why the Torah doesn't say anywhere that people were kvetching about the clouds. But we know that there were clouds that left. These were the clouds of Anania Kavod, glorifying the Jewish people, which didn't have a direct association with the people at that time, so they didn't necessarily care about it. But that answers another question about why the king of Canaan, the Canaanite king, why did he attack? Why did he attack? The clouds of glorification, of glorifying the Jewish people that were there in the merit of Aaron, they showed all the other people, all the other nations, that this is God's chosen nation. They were, when you saw the people traveling from afar and you saw these clouds, you knew this is a people that you don't want to get in, you don't want to mess with, that God is with their people. And when those clouds weren't visible anymore, the Canaanite king, even though the other clouds were there, thought that God had abandoned his people. God abandoned his people. So he says, it's a sign that we have to attack. It's a sign that we'll be able to be successful. And he runs to attack them only to realize that God was still with the Jewish people. And the clouds only left because Aaron had passed. It was so-called in a way of mourning Aaron. Aaron passes away. There has to be some change, some different way that the nation of the desert, about how they presented themselves. Aaron, the high priest, Moses' brother, and that's why the clouds of glory were removed to honor Aaron. But nevertheless, God's protection was there, as the Canaanite king found out. So back, now that we come to the conclusion, let's retrace for a second. Let's retrace. So we had a question, we hear and we talk all about the well of Miriam coming back and the people were disgruntled. The question is, when it came to Aaron, when it came to the clouds of glory, there's no mention. Did they come back? And if they came back, were the people complaining and that's why they came back? We're not sure. But we got to the conclusion was that there were two types of clouds. There were the clouds that were there for regular protection, and there were clouds that glorified the Jewish people. The clouds that glorified the Jewish people were there in Aaron's merit, that all the nations of the world saw this travel caravan in the desert, and they said, woo, here comes God's chosen people. Here comes God's glorified nation. When Aaron passed away, out of honor to Aaron, respect to Aaron, how vital Aaron was for the procession and the getting the people from Egypt to the Holy Land, the clouds of glory left. The clouds of glory left. Now the people, and they didn't come back. They didn't come back. And now the people, they didn't complain. And there's no count of them complaining because it didn't affect them in the same way as the water affected them. And maybe they didn't even realize that they left in general, because it was really for the other people, to the other nations of the world, to look at us. So they didn't complain and the clouds didn't come back. Answered. But now the question is, why didn't they? Why take them away? Take the clouds away. Or question is twofold. Either take the clouds away, symbolizing Aaron passed, just like the well went away when Miriam left, but bring them back in honor of Moshe, in order to continue through getting to the land of Israel. Or if you're going to take away the clouds of glory and not bring them back, then take away the well of Miriam and use some other form of sustenance of water to provide to the Jewish people. Why, when it came to the well of Miriam, did the well of Miriam come back in the merit of Moses as the leader? But the clouds of glory, which, they weren't maybe necessarily vital to the people living, you could say, but they were vital in the idea of what was going on at that time, the chosen people, the Jewish people. People looked at the clouds and they felt important also, you could say, maybe not everybody, but some people. Why not bring them back also in the merit of Moses? Or bring none of them back and have the water come from a different avenue? Why the distinction? What's the difference between them? And this ties in directly to Moses. And this is where we're going to end tonight. Moses, when he committed himself to taking the Jewish people out of the land, he told them, I will take care of you from A to Z as I bring you to the land of Israel. I will provide everything for you. I, Moses, your leader, personally guarantee that you'll be okay. You'll be taken care of. So now, in regards to taking care of them, in regards to sustaining them and protecting them, so we know that the manna fell from heaven in the merit of Moses, and water came in the merit of Miriam. But even though Miriam passed away and her well kind of stopped for a few minutes, it had to come back, and Moses had pleaded with God for them to come back because of Moses' personal guarantee that he will provide sustenance for the Jewish people till the end, which he did. Even though we know that the manna stopped a little bit before they entered the land when Moses passed away on the 7th of Adar, you might think that there was no more food. The manna never fell again. It's not true. The amount of manna that fell to the ground on the 7th of Adar sustained the Jewish people till they entered the land. And in regards to the water, when Moses passed away, the well did stop. But at that time, they were already parked by the Jordan River, so they already had water to which to sustain themselves. So Moses keeps his promise to the end to the Jewish people, telling them, I will make sure you are okay, to the end. So the well had to come back. The well of Miriam had to come back because Moses had told God, I made a promise. I took the people out. I'm keeping to my promise. We got to bring back the well. The whole story with the well, we learned that a little bit before. Take from that what you will. But in regards to the clouds of glory, that didn't provide direct sustenance or direct protection to the Jewish people. It didn't come back in Moses' merit. Moses didn't ask for it to come back in his merit. Those were Aaron's clouds, and they didn't have to come back. But what's interesting you find in regards to who Moses was as a leader and to leadership in general, and we're all in positions of leadership. When we talk about leadership, I don't mean that you have to be in charge of the Jewish people to exemplify leadership. In our day-to-day lives, whether you're a leader for your children, or you're a leader for your family, or you're a leader for your community, or you're a leader for your friends, and you know what, you could be all at the same time, and you know what, we actually are all leaders at the same time. Wherever we are, you're a walking form of leadership. You just have to decide if that you're going to take yourself seriously enough. That's on you. But if you want to take yourself seriously enough, the way a person conducts themselves and looks at themselves, we are people of leadership. We constantly are leading someone somewhere, somehow. And what you could learn from Moses is that you don't think Moses would have loved for the clouds of glory to come back in his merit. He would have loved it. And yeah, true. While Aaron was alive, the clouds were in his honor. That's great. But now that Aaron passed, I'm still alive. I'm the leader. The cloud should come back in my honor, right? In my honor, the cloud should come back. And he could have talked himself into a million reasons why the people could benefit from the clouds. But at the end of the day, what made Moses so great and so a tremendous leader was that he was able to get down to the core of it all and really tell the people, I care about what you need. And that's what leadership is. There's nothing in it for me. A leader, I am here to simply lead. I'm here to simply guide. I am here to simply provide, regardless of any personal gain, benefit, glory, no matter what. And when it comes to benefit and glory, I could convince myself that you also, the person that I'm trying to lead, also benefits from, exalting myself a little bit. If I have what we know as a healthy ego, it helps other people as well benefit from, seeing work ethic or whatever it is that you want to exemplify leadership. But Moses said, I don't want anything to do with it. I am simply here 1,000, 1,000,000% for the other people. I'm making sure that you have what you need to survive, and I will do whatever I can to ensure that you have what you need to survive. Sure, I could go and make everything, grander by having the clouds of glory come back, and I could convince you it's for you, and maybe I get a little bit of personal gratification that they came back in my honor, but he didn't care at all. He did not care. He said, my job as a leader is to ensure that I am there unconditionally, not for anything to do with me, but 100% to do with someone else, which is a lesson we could take in our own lives in every facet. When it comes to you want to be a real leader, you have to be able to show that there's zero in it for you, and it's all about caring for the other people. And with that, I'm going to conclude Parshas Chukat. Tremendous insights, tremendous things to think about, beauty of Torah, many questions, many answers, many ways to think. And the best part is we could do it all again next year, and it just will keep coming. It will keep coming. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'll see you next week. Any questions or comments, feel free to ask.
Rabbi,
yes.
I had a question. The clouds of glory in Aaron's merit protected, in a sense, Israel from enemies because they would see the cloud and know. When the clouds left because of the peacemaker that Aaron was,
right.
Could that be seen as then the individuals of the Israel nation had to carry Hashem in them and not guarantee the cloud? So when the foreign enemy saw the cloud was gone, they would attack, but the Israel knew that God was still with them, cloud or no cloud. And that's what we had to take with it. I don't know. I'm just.
It's a good, you know what? Well, you know what? Why not? You know what? And I don't have many years on me at all, but for my little time that I have on me, what's fascinating about Torah is that everything could be true at the same time. Yes, 100%. That the timing of Aaron's passing with the entering of the land of Israel, with the people now having to internalize within inside themselves the message that God's there for them, it coincides with also Moses's, you could say it coincides with Moses. One of the explanations we had on the hitting of the rock, where Moses said that the people got to toughen up a little bit. They got to internalize a little bit more. Yeah, that's fast. That's great. That's actually very nice.
Fascinating drush, Rabbi.
Yes, thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week. Have a good night, everybody.
All right, good night.
Laila Tov, l'chaim.